In this video, I'm going to be philosophizing on the importance of codified codifications regarding symbolism, and not so much what's symbolic, but particular symbolizers and the actual representors that represent through marking and symbols that are drawn various codification systems that pertain to and regard analytical thinking. And what this means is that there's more precise and well-defined, as a must, good enough and necessary conditions be well-defined and not vague and not just arbitrary and meaningless to our direct perception and meaning interpretation specific to them, specific to the drawn-out symbols that when we look at, there's an objective meaning to it, and we can render a specific range of meaning interpretations that are actually, rather than perceived to be psychologically true, valid, and meaningful. And they allow us to access to knowledge that's easy and easier to access as we are able to, in subsequent moments, access priors of thinking and prior knowledge. And this increases access to knowledge, which ultimately increases what's called the accessibility of knowledge. And accessibility is important because codification systems have helped to free individuals throughout history and time, starting all the way in Mesopotamia, which is where a lot of Western European thought actually emerges and develops, is through the Mesopotamian myths and ideas, but not so much the myths. It's actually moving from those myths into what those myths have helped to develop through the creative minds of great thinkers, the intellect that were more skeptical of more of these ideological associations to symbolic processing of meaningful information that is supposed to be constrained more to our subjective aesthetic perceptions and aesthetic appreciations, and they tend to tap into our feelings. And when we don't really emotionally regulate our emotions correct to what's appropriate and as a must good enough and necessary conditions to be able to engage meaningfully in any sort of self-intelligence process, what can happen is we can become destabilized, and this can produce mental illness and psychiatric illness, and as a result of giving up agency often to another who's more knowledgeable than us, who can arbitrarily and in many ways meaninglessly and engage the absurd within our existence by telling us whatever they really want or feel on whim, and not whim of wit, but more so a arbitrary whim, and these wrongful convictions about what's right and not so what's correct and meaningful and psychologically true, and pertains to and regards psychological truths of our existence that are boundness to the situatedness of our existence, that allows us to engage free thinking processes meaningfully when we can access to knowledge regarding specific codification systems such as the alphabet, and more importantly words that have specific terms to terminologies that as a must good enough and necessary conditions be well defined and well calibrated to specific meaning interpretations that mostly exist prior, but where our greatest thinkers instantiate new meanings and make them more accessible. They create access to knowledge through instantiation processes that become substantiated in learnings and tend to improve society. And this is what ultimately led to the Enlightenment and Enlightenment thinking, and what really categoricalizes the categoricalizations of Enlightenment thought that have allowed us to enter the digital age, in which we could not otherwise if we didn't have more sophisticated well-calibrators who well-calibrated, well-defined terms and instantiated meanings and more precise codifications that moved away from these symbolic, arbitrary, meaningless, absurd processings and convictions that were wrongful convictions of individuals who tended to themselves suffer from a great deal of rigid thought that is conducive to mental illness and ultimately psychiatric illness, that affected medicine, and which was liberated in the psychological enlightenment with thinkers like Kant and emerging psychologists who fought for a long time and pioneer, or not so much pioneering, but creating the well-defined codification systems of classifiable, classified classifications of specific subjectivo-objectivo relationships that constitute knowledge, and constitute knowledge in regards to specific perception, action, and behavior apparatuses proximate near and far to approximations of specific perception, behavior, and agency processes of perception, action, and behavior that allow us to engage as free agents with the self and surrounds meaningfully. And that's all I wanted to say for this video. I hope you enjoy. Have an awesome one. Bye.